Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a special edition of the Daily Friend Show. Today, we're not going to be doing a normal episode discussing what's in the news. Instead, we are going to be talking to Hermann Pretorius about his new book, which has just been published and can be found in stores. And I'll get to that towards the end about where exactly you can get this book. But the title of the book is Rule Breakers: What Really Happened in the 2024 Elections, How the 2024 Election Campaign Changed South Africa Forever. Now, Herman, I think, the first question I thought of for the discussion today was, what is your book about? But I think the title kind of gives it away a bit. So, attacking the thesis of your book, let me start by saying how the campaign changed, the 2024 campaign changed South Africa forever. That doesn't sound right. I mean, before the election, we had an ANC government. Cyril Ramaphosa is still president today. Indeed, the policy framework hasn't really changed that much in South Africa. The GNU might look like a thing on paper, but have the political dynamics really changed in this country? If you add the EFF, MK, and ANC together, it's a bloc that approaches 2/3 of the vote. Has anything really changed? Can you tell us a bit about
I think
your
so.
thesis of your book?
Yes. So I think given the title, I'm forced to say yes. It's a bit late to change my mind, but I think fundamentally, South Africa will never be the same. And I think the observation that the ANC, MK, EFF, if you take their vote share, you combine it, it becomes, the 65 to 68% ish block of voting power that we can track through the elections going back to 1994, when the ANC got 63% of the vote. I think that's a fair point. And in fact, I address that repeatedly in the book, where I say that the contest, the three-way tug of war in the 2024 election campaign between the ANC, EFF, and MK essentially came down to about a 10 percentage point swing vote block between those three parties. It was to the extent that those three parties were in conflict, they were fighting for that 10% block that showed movement between those three parties. In the end, MK got it all, essentially. But looking at July 2023, when the EFF were celebrating their 10th birthday, their momentum was significant. I mean, they filled FNB Stadium with 90,000 people, really showing a party of momentum. And that 10% voting bloc then shifted back to the ANC in September 2023, when they launched their campaign with a very successful Dobsonville rally, also in Soweto. And then towards the end of the campaign, it was just becoming increasingly clear that Zuma had out-messaged both Malema and Ramaphosa. And if you want to know why MK was such a successful party in the end in the campaign, it was because it essentially took that whole swing block. So that observation of some things haven't changed, I think, is right, but that misses the things that fundamentally did change. Now, this might come as a surprise to many, but the title of the book, Rule Breakers, is a play on words. Now, I know I'm not known for plays on words, so it comes as a very left field suggestion, but not only were the rules of politics broken, in the sense that what usually happens in election campaigns didn't happen this time around, but we also saw the rule of the ANC broken. This was the first fundamental challenge to the ANC's dominance. Now, there's a difference between a party's dominance and perhaps an ideological dominance, that the case may be made that 65 block between ANC, EFF, and MK might represent some ideological dominance to a certain extent, but there's a debate for that. But what certainly can't be denied is that the ANC's political rule has been broken. And we see that, I think, very clearly with the VAT debate earlier this year, where for 30 years, the notion of budget passing through Parliament was essentially a formality. And I think that's part of what explains the weird disruption of this year's budget, because sort of the muscle memory of Treasury had been developed to essentially function under an ANC dominant system until that muscle memory tried to pick up something which is, multi-party collaboration, and the muscle wasn't strong enough, and then the system collapsed a bit. So to a very significant extent, and as I come towards the end of the book, one of the conclusions is that politics will never be the same again. Political campaigning will never be the same again. Governance will never be the same again, because the ANC can't pretend that it'll govern as a single party. It might in a very unique set of circumstances in an election, but that is now less likely than it was before. The more likely option from now on is some form of a multi-party governmental arrangement. That means ANC promises, EFF promises, MK, DA, all party political manifestos can no longer pretend that the policies contained in those manifestos, the messages communicated through the course of the campaign, will actually resonate with people if they are based on the premise of single party governance. So to a very significant extent, many things did change, even though some of the underlying fundamentals might have remained the same. Yes, Cyril Ramaphosa is still president today, but this was a president that just, last week needed to cancel an overseas trip because there was a real possibility of the DA making a political decision that would disrupt his presidency. And that is something that is new in South Africa. So even though he is the president, he is no longer just a president that has one party to manage. Even for the president remaining the incumbent, being re-elected in parliament, the rules are new, the old rules are broken.
For what it's worth, that is something I kind of completely am on board with. I am somewhat skeptical as well, the same of that thesis that I was laying out there, that nothing has really changed in South African politics. I think one of the mistakes that thesis makes is to make things a little bit too ideological. As similar as the EFF, MK, and the ANC, EFF, and MK all are, they are still different organizations involving different people who couldn't make it work when they were all in the same organization together. So, saying that, oh, well, viewing all of their supporters as sort of one block, I think is a bit silly. It's also worth noting that those three together don't make 2/3 of the vote anymore. Whereas they did quite recently even.
And as they did at moments during the campaign. So what makes this campaign quite unique, especially within the context of the last 30 years, was that the outcome was genuinely an outcome in doubt. The result, the formation of the government was up for grabs in a very real sense. And to the extent that South Africans are ideological, because I do think we have data to understand that there is an ideological center of gravity in South Africa. But that doesn't mean that South African voters are very ideological voters, because what I also do in the book is I try to understand what was it that moved support from one party to another. What was it that boosted this issue or that issue to more prominence, more salience? And one of the interesting conclusions I come to is that on the day that MK launched their election manifesto, the party had already effectively secured 12% of the vote. So to a very real extent, MK shouldn't be seen as an ideological party, because without any ideological promise, without any policy framework, just on the identity of its leader, on the focus of its message, the sort of implications of the Zuma mythology, MK managed to get to 12% of the vote, only adding 1 or 2% further on the election day itself. So when South Africans look at politics and they become overly ideological, they come to the conclusion that all MK voters are Zulu nationalists, all ANC voters are NDR ideologues, all DA voters are liberals, all EFF voters are Afro-Leninist Marxists. I would advise against that simplistic analysis. If we're going to assume and accept that consumer choices are often quite irrational, that you buy the shaving cream or the shampoo based on whether it was eye level on the shelf or not, or whether it was in the temptation aisle, that chocolate or this chocolate. If we can appreciate that consumers quite often make irrational decisions despite being informed decisions, informed by how much money you have in your wallet, what your appetite is, what's available. So an irrational decision isn't the same as an uninformed decision. But if we can accept that consumers choose ordinary day-to-day products on reasons that aren't purely empirical cost-benefit analysis basis, we shouldn't be surprised to find voter behavior being similar, in the sense that voters don't necessarily do the type of cost-benefit analysis that we think they do. If you can find a soccer team or a cricket team or a rugby team at the bottom of the log, and you've still got supporters for that team, it should be an indication that that could apply to politics. Loyalty to an identity, to a tribe, to a party, to a product, these things are not just cognitive exercises. They are deeply emotional exercises formed by the message you hear, the vibes, as it were, that you pick up.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, firstly, this isn't unique to South Africa by any means. Democracy and voting is a somewhat arcane process sometimes in terms of how people kind of arrive at decisions sometimes. And, yes, people do have a rational part of their minds that definitely has a big impact on how they make these decisions. But, should we be surprised that voting is in fact a much more complicated process? I mean, when people get married, they choose partners and things. They're not always making some sort of strict cost benefit analysis for their lives about who they're going to marry, why they're going to marry, why this person over this person. This is even in the biggest decisions in life, we don't make fully rational decisions. So I don't think it should be any surprise that when it comes to voting, people can be a bit more complicated than any simple narrative would have. So,
and
Hermann, let's
on that, I think a very good example of the type of decision that might not be the obvious political argument. I think one can look at the PA, at the Patriotic Alliance. The three things really stood out from the PA's election campaign. In terms of messaging, in terms of what really got them attention, what really got them real estate in the public debate. And those three things were illegal immigration, the question of Israel, and colored nationalist politics with a Judeo-Christian flavor. Now, on the face of it, those three components don't seem to build a coherent case to vote PA. I mean, it's I didn't see on any PA poster, vote for the nation state of Israel to have a friend in South Africa. I didn't see on a poster anywhere, colored nationalism for the win. Nor did I see, the PA is the only party that can secure the border, because that is quite obviously not a feasible election promise. The PA, despite growing almost 5,000% in 2024 compared to 2019, had no realistic promise to secure the border. But if you combine those three things that seem inherently disparate, and you understand that they together comprise a message of standing up to displacement of a people, you start to understand why those three independent, unplanned, almost subconscious or conscious messages that broke through helped the PA to form a coherent message. Because if you look at colored South Africans and the experience they had and have, what is it? It is a legacy of being displaced physically by the apartheid regime, where the District 6 mythology and the idea of being moved away from where you were by a white government, there's a real sense of historic displacement. Number two, there's the fear within the Western Cape colored society of the so-called Eastern Cape economic refugees that come in and threaten socioeconomic displacement of the Western Cape colored population. And then if you combine what does Israel have in common with illegal immigration, with colored nationalism, with Christian, Judeo-Christian overtones, you must reach the conclusion that part of the PA's strength in this campaign was this idea that it is a party willing to stand up against the displacement of a specific group. Because the Israel question is, in a way, a question of geopolitical displacement. The Jews were displaced. The Palestinians were displaced. The existence of Israel today is threatened by forces that want to displace that Jewish population from the river to the sea, to coin a phrase. Illegal immigration is an issue that drives this fear of displacement. I am displaced from my community, from my work, from my hospital, from my school, by people who are replacing me within this community. So whilst those three policy points of illegal immigration, colored nationalism, and the Israel-Palestine conflict have nothing inherently in common on the face of it, once you understand that those were the messages that really helped the PA build its brand, build its vibe on the election campaign, you understand why at an emotional level, even perhaps a subconscious level, the idea started taking hold in largely colored communities who swung to the PA to understand that this is a party with a strength, with a will to stand up against the displacement that threatened my parents and that threatened me today. That's not an irrational position, but it certainly isn't the typical ideological, box ticking exercise of I'm looking for a party that does A, B, and C. It was an effective message, not because it was logically necessarily constructive, but because at the end of the day, a PA voter knew why it wanted to vote PA at a very emotive and sort of convincing basis. And I think that's why we should be careful of over ideologicalizing elections. It's quite often much more about the primitive feeling of, am I wanted? Do I belong? And the PA gave Mackenzie an excellent example of how to weaponize that politically.
So let's focus a little bit more on the book. Take us through exactly sort of, I guess, the book's methodology. In other words, like how does it actually work? What are you doing in this book? Is it are you just talking about the players involved? You've already talked a bit about data and stuff. Or how exactly do you develop your arguments in the book? What will readers find inside of it?
So the methodology that I developed for the book was really an attempt to understand shifts in public opinion, that intangible idea of political momentum, who's up, who's down, and why. And in this day and age, we have such incredible resources that we can actually, for the first time, really almost listen to the public conversation as it is happening through social media and through news media. And in June 2023, I started collecting data points with no clear idea of what I wanted to end up doing with those data points. But I just knew that I had a gut feeling that told me that if you assume that an election campaign is about messaging, getting people to hear what you are trying to say, trying to convince people to vote for you, then surely the effect of that conversation should be visible in the media, in social media, in news media. So I started collecting these data points. For every party, I built a keyword list that comprised the party's key phraseology, its key messaging, its key leaders, its party names, its abbreviations, its often used hashtags, to start tracking when a party is sort of being talked about, when it is making an impact, when people are hearing it. And then at one point, I overlaid the support of the ANC with this media data that I had been collecting. And what I saw was that if I relayed their social media and news media presence to a sort of a percentage form, if on a given day we had 100 social media posts about political parties, and in 40 of those, the ANC was mentioned, I started to see, if you overlay political opinion polls with a proportion of a party having a share of the conversation, these things started to track. The more the ANC was talked about, the higher its support was. The higher its support was, the more it was talked about. I'm not quite sure which is the chicken and which is the egg, but there was clearly a correlation between a party's public presence and its support levels. And that is where the PPSL model came from. I then worked for every party trying to understand what is its relation with social media and news media and its support levels. At the end of the day, I ended up with a model that tracked very closely to opinion polling going into the election campaign. And people can find it in the book on page 24. I overlay the opinion polling, the traditional opinion polling of vital importance, the SRF tracking poll in the weeks before voting day, with the model that I created to essentially take their presence in the news media, social media, filter it through the importance, the relative importance of these two forms of media. Not all forms of media are created equal. Some parties, like the EFF, are overrepresented in social media, and some parties, like the IFP, are underrepresented on social media. And if you can start understanding those relations, you start to be able to see the parallels.
That's the sort of I guess the criticism of the model. I mean, I think it's absolutely fascinating and intuitive way of looking at the situation, exactly as you say, momentum. But it's not that I don't think people don't express politics all on social media. I think nowadays people do. It's just that not all social media discussions are necessarily visible. I mean, I think WhatsApp groups and WhatsApp is actually a very powerful tool in South Africa, particularly when it comes to politics, and that there are lots of these like community WhatsApp groups and family WhatsApp groups and things where political messaging can be spread that aren't necessarily available in the data. Just your thoughts on that as it relates to your method here.
So I used to, it would surprise people to know that I don't have access to the WhatsApp groups, and that'll forever blunt my analysis. But what I did do is I used Google search data, trends data. I got access to, I applied through Facebook for access to their metadata library, and I used Reddit data and Twitter/X data, YouTube data. And what was fascinating was the correlation between these various forms of data. If something was spiking in Google search trends, you could see that spike in Facebook comments, you could see that spike in X comments, you could see that spike in YouTube comments, in Reddit mentions. So that made me feel safe enough to say that even though I can't investigate all of the social medias, from the social media platforms that I can see, there's a clear correlation between something spiking on this platform and spiking on this platform. So it gave me some security. That is, of course, not absolute, but it gave me some security to say, if I can go on that which I can see, and I can see glimpse of what I cannot see, but it correlates enough, the basis is that the data is to a degree reliable. And what is very important to say is this is an experimental model. Absolutely. There's no denying the fact that this isn't a magical mind-reading device of 30 million people. But as I say in the book, political analysis so often makes medieval entrail reading look empirical, where it's sort of I think public think this, and what I tried to do was at least get a credible methodology that is consistent.
The famous sort of hack columnist thing of like, here's a conversation with my Uber driver and what it says about our society, which I think this model is a much more scientific version. It sort of pushes that aside and say, okay, just let's not overanalyze silly things. Let's actually look at what we have available.
Yes, and so is this model perfect? Absolutely not. But it is an attempt to get an empirical grip on public opinion through available
the empirical study of the vibes.
Yes, in a way, is it and what's interesting is that in the end, when I collected a year's worth of media data, and I can give you the numbers here, my full timeline of the campaign from June 2023 to June 2024 contained 10,692 data entries that were the collations of 3.379558 million news media data points and 20,533,845 social media points. So taking all those media points, filtering the information through each party's relative relationship with this form or that form of media, after inserting that into my model, and asking essentially the model to say what would be the levels of support for the various political parties on 29 May. So in other words, without entering any information about real support levels, asking the model just to go off this formula of collected data, I got the ACDP on 0.5%. They got 0.6% in the election. I got the ANC on 41.1%. They got 40.2% in the election. I had Action SA on 1.8. They got 1.2. I had Bosa on 0.9. They got 0.4. I had the DA on 21.4. They got 21.8. I had the EFF on 9. They got 9.5. I had the Freedom Front Plus on 1.2, they got 1.4. I had the IFP on 3.7, they got 3.9. I got MK on 13.9, they got 14.6. I had the PA on 2.2, they got 2. Rise and Zanzi, I had on 1, they got 0.5. The UDM I had on 0.3, they got 0.5. So whether the model is perfect or whether it will stand the test of time in any circumstance, was what was clear for me is that to the extent that I had support data, this correlated closely enough for me to say, right, in a bit of a willing suspension of disbelief, we can see in this a momentum tracker. And if we can see in this a momentum tracker, if I can see a spike in the DA's support, it's possible for me to investigate what caused that spike. And I not only applied this methodology to political parties, but also to 15 issues that we at the IRR poll every year. So then I could see, look, there's a spike in DA support. The DA is gaining heat, gaining momentum at the same time that corruption is gaining heat, gaining momentum. So quite clearly, there's a link between the two. Let me go look at the campaign data, at news reporting, at social media, and understand what was it that the DA was doing on the issue of corruption that gave them that momentum. So that's the premise of the book, is that the public presence model, the PPSL, public presence support levels model, is a fair representation of perhaps not exact political support, but a clear idea of who's up, who's down, and once you have that, you can investigate as to why.
Fascinating. All right, so to finish this off, sort of where does the book take us towards the end? I mean, obviously you don't want to give everything away because people should go and buy it and read it and all that. But, you know, what's the sort of end point of where the book takes us?
So it's from the beginning of planning this thing, I wanted to take it from June 2023, 1st of June 2023 to the 30th of June 2024. And luckily for me, President Ramaphosa chose the 30th of June to announce his GNU cabinet. So he gave me the perfect filmic ending for my timeline, and where we end is very much at the conclusion of the election narrative, the establishment of the GNU. And one of my friends who'd read this book, who was one of the first people I before it even got published, I asked him to read it just to give me an idea. And he said, what's interesting about it is political analysis with a narrative. And it's sort of, in a way, the biography of the election campaign. What happened to public sentiment? Where did it go? And where we end up is in this place of, right, the GNU is formed. What can we learn from that preceded its messaging work?
Sorry, a little bit of a technical thing there. Herman, you were saying about how the book was the biography of the election.
Yes, really covering the events, the timelines, the sort of surprises. And it leads us to then be able to look back and think, right, what worked on the election campaign? What didn't? What were the unforeseen breakthroughs? What were the foreseen failures? And what I do, particularly in the last chapters, is I identify where the big parties, the prominent parties, had their moments of momentum. And for the ANC, I sort of almost go diagnostically and say, if they had run a different campaign with a different focus, if they had used President Ramaphosa differently, because we can understand where he added momentum and where he failed to add momentum. And I sort of give what I would have put forward as the ANC's messaging strategy, the usage of Ramaphosa. The idea is very much to lead people to understand beyond the GNU, beyond this rule-breaking election, we are entering new territory about what parties can promise, can say on the campaign trail to get people to take them seriously. And then I look ahead and say, you know, whether the GNU works or not work, that's not really the question of this book. Whatever happens with the GNU is, from now on, any party, literally any party, from the smallest party to the biggest party, can end up in the same government. We might end up in a situation where a DA leader gets asked about the position of the ACDP on abortion, because they might end up in the same government. Someone might ask a future DA leader, will there be a referendum on abortion, to get the ACDP on side? an ANC leader, a future ANC leader, might be asked about what they think about coloured nationalism for the PA to be brought on side. EFF or ANC or DA might be asked what they think about Zulu federalism for the IFP and MK. So the questions that political party leaders will now be vulnerable to in terms of their partners around the cabinet table has changed. And that is both for good and ill. The small parties now have a relevance that they've never had before, but they've also got a responsibility that they've never had before. They also need to be able to say, if I'm a party in a multi-party government, what will my mandate be? What will be my purpose if I'm representing, like the ACDP or the Freedom Front Plus, a very specific identity-based constituency and electorate? So it looks ahead, and I start the book with a quotation from by Abraham Lincoln, where I say, in this age, in this country, public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Against it, nothing can succeed. Whoever molds public sentiment goes deeper than he who enacts statutes or pronounces judicial decisions. And I close the book, or I start one of the final chapters of the book, with a quotation from William Gladstone, where he was writing to his son about effective public speaking. And he said, remember that if you are to sway an audience, you must, besides thinking out your matter, watch them all along. And that's sort of the takeaway here. Public sentiment and watch them all along. Because those two things, if you are a politician, understand that public sentiment is the space in which you compete, and you need to watch your electorate all along. But if you're a voter, if you're an ordinary person, the same applies. You are in the battlefield of public sentiment, and that battlefield, that landscape, politicians during election campaigns are going to try and shape what you are exposed to, what you hear, what you see, and you should watch them all along, because that will give you an indication of where in this new South Africa, this multi-party landscape, they will provide you the information about what type of government or what type of oppositional player they will ultimately be. And that's why it really is, I think, a rule-breaking election, and South Africa has been changed by it forever.
Fantastic. So, Hermann, title of the book, where can we get it?
Yes, so title of the book, Rule Breakers, How the 2024 Election Campaign Changed South Africa Forever. And it is available on Takealot. I think most people will perhaps find that an easy source. I know that some exclusive books franchises have ordered it. It is available at Protea Books in Pretoria and wherever they have shops, I think here in Potchefstroom. I've seen it on sale at, or for sale, not on sale. It's too early to be on sale. I've seen it for sale at Bargain Books. So, you know, it's out there. If people want to read it, I would love people to give feedback on the take I gave. And yes, I hope it's interesting and useful, and it leads to perhaps a better understanding of the forces that shape public opinion, that shape public sentiment, and makes people alert to keeping an eye out for these forces, for watching them all along.
Awesome stuff. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. We hope you found this show interesting. There will be no show tomorrow, as we are, many of us are at an internal conference. But thank you very much, and have a wonderful day. See you on Monday. Cheers. The Daily Friend Show and The Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR, or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.